Last week we started a series on worship, and we looked at a passage that talked about worshiping in spirit and in truth. And because we worship God in spirit, we discovered that we can worship God anytime, anywhere. He's not tied to a location. And when we worship God in truth, this is what we discover. We discover what God is like, but we also discover the truth about what we're like, and that we are broken people. And so part of worship is actually inviting God in to those broken places, those broken spaces in our lives, so that He can mold us and make us, so that He can form us into His image. That's kind of foundational for what worship is. Worship, yes, it honors God, and that's great, but it also changes us so that we can honor Him even more. And so I laid the foundation with that passage last week, and talking about the Samaritan woman and how all that transpired. And I said that we would just step it up a little bit this week. That was just more of a plain teaching. And so today I want to try to step it up a little bit. And let's see how things go. Anyway, I am not a fan of fiction. I'm not a fan of fantasy, I must confess, and if you are, I'm sorry. I'm not even a fan of Christian allegory like so many believers are. I have my hands full with biblical allegory and trying to understand what that means so I can give you a true representation of that. And so I don't have time to read and consider these other things, although many do, and that is wonderful and that is great. I'm just not a fan of those things. But in order to step it up a little bit, what I do want to do today is I want to take a video clip from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And I looked it up on Wikipedia. I Googled it, and I clicked on Wikipedia to see what it had to say about it. And it said that it was a high epic fantasy. I didn't have to read about it because I know, essentially what it's saying, but it's a high epic fantasy, exactly everything that I am not necessarily interested in. But I wanted to use it today, and when I was reading there on Wikipedia about it, I read this line as well, that Tolkien wasn't a fan of allegory either. So I'm like, yes. Actually, it said that he preferred applicability, not allegory. How does all of this apply? And so in his allegory, what he's doing is he's letting people know in a different way how all of this actually applies to our lives. So I can live with that. That's not fantasy, that's reality. So I can dig what he's trying to say. I have never seen Lord of the Rings. Nevertheless, I want to use a clip today from one of those particular movies, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. We're going to watch a video clip, and as we watch the video clip, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. Keep your eye out. Look for the dude in the hat. And it happens shortly after Aragorn gets crowned. So keep your eye out for the dude in the hat. Lance. Well, there's good hair in this movie, apparently. That looks like Robin Williams.
Now come the days of the king. 'Tis 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 'tis
And now applause. Now keep your eye out for the guy in the hat. There he is. Did you see him? There it is. Look for the guy in the hat. You see him there on the left in the black hat? Those other things are helmets. You see the guy in the hat? There he is. He's just applauding for the king. Now, I don't know anything about this guy, and you don't know anything either. But it's really funny that even the guy in the hat, he gets, as an actor, credit for being in this movie. And he's only an extra. He gets 2 seconds of screen time, and all he does is clap, squint a little bit, and have a funny-looking smile on his face. And there he is. He gets credit for being in this movie. So imagine with me, if you would, if you bump into this guy, and you're kind of doing the small talk thing, you know? And so you ask him, hey, what do you do? And he says, oh, I'm a movie star. Oh, yeah? Well, what movies have you been in? Oh, Return of the King. Oh, yeah, not a fan of Allegory. Haven't seen that one. And so then you go and you watch the movie, and it's like, what? I don't see this guy. What? What's he talking about? He said he was a star in the movie. So how weird would it be for a guy like this to go around telling everybody that he ran into, hey, I'm a movie star and I starred in a movie? For a dude that has 2 seconds of screen time and all he does is clap, that would be really weird for him to think that he's a star. What was his role? You're on screen for 2 seconds and you clap for the king, and that's it. And he's utterly forgettable in the scheme of the whole movie in every other way. But there's something in this scene that I think is applicable. It's relevant to all of us. Turn to Acts chapter 17. You see, in some way, we're all dudes with hats. Metaphorically speaking, we're all just extras. Acts chapter 17. Now, Paul is a missionary, and he is traveling around in the first century world all over the place, and he finds himself presenting the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection in all different types of settings. He's preaching in synagogues and public settings, in homes and towns, in cities, and in this particular scene, in this very famous and notable passage, he is in Athens, Greece. And so at this point in all of history, Athens is not necessarily a military force as Grecians. Athens is not an economic force either, but they are a cultural force. As a matter of fact, Greek culture is still affecting our lives today. So at that point, yes, they weren't so big as what they were a few centuries earlier, but nevertheless, if you go to Athens and you look around and you view the culture, you realize the force in which, the force that they exerted upon all of culture at the time. And one of the things that Athens was known for was that they had a council there. And you could come there and you could share the latest philosophy, the latest religion, all of your latest cutting-edge thoughts, and you could come and share it. You could actually get a hearing before this council that was there that operated in the Areopagus. And they could then listen to it, and they could kind of weigh it out. They could examine it to hear, say whether or not it had any credence, whether or not they thought that they should consider it any further. So it's kind of like a town, I would maybe equate it with Berkeley, California, big college town. That's like where all the latest thought comes in. You know, we think it's Hollywood, and yeah, they have a lot of sway, but towns like Berkeley, that's where the up-and-comers, that's where the next brilliant generation come from, and that's where all these crazy thoughts come from. And that's where they're all aired out at. Well, that's like Athens back in the day. And so in Athens, there are two big philosophical schools of thought in the day. There are many schools of thought. in Athens, but two big ones, Stoicism and Epicureanism. And as fun as it would be for me to talk to you about what all of that meant, I'm going to abstain from that today, and I'm simply going to say that these two different philosophies, and my wife raised her hand back there, she's definitely in agreement. These two philosophies that were kind of big in Athens in the day, even though, we don't hear or know too much about them, they did play into the religious thought and philosophy back then. And so Paul is there, and he's going around town, and he's observing, and he ends up actually getting invited because he's preaching. He ends up getting invited to this council, and he is so brilliant as he appears before this council, as he just systematically dismantles Stoicism and Epicureanism and Greek religious thought as he is proclaiming the gospel. You see, Athens at this time as well is full of statues of gods and goddesses. As a matter of fact, it's said of Athens that there are more gods and goddesses, more statues and places of worship, about 10,000, than there are people, residents of Athens. So they are a very religious community as well. And so as Paul is walking around town before he gets invited to the council, he's making all of these observations, and he comes upon an altar. And this altar is dedicated to an unknown God. So this is how religious they are. They have 10,000 gods and goddesses set up everywhere. Free thinking. You think that's something new? No way. This is crazy. And just in case there's 10,001 gods, they erect an altar to this unknown God. And Paul sees that, and he uses it as an entrance into his presentation at this council. And what he says is, so, what is unknown to you? This God that is unknown to you. I am now going to reveal who he is. In about 10 or 15 minutes or so, this will relate back to Lord of the Rings. So you're just going to have to trust me for a second, okay? Now let's look at verse 24. Verse 24. Acts chapter 17, verse 24, as Paul systematically dismantles a Greek religious thought. No room for political correctness here, okay? This is just the gospel. The God. Imagine how offensive to say that to the thinking people of a town where there are already 10,000 and maybe 10,001 gods. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. So in one sentence, how incredibly offensive would he be to this council and to all of the inhabitants of Athens? Listen to these offenses. The God, like singular, one God, not this multitude of gods. One God, not many. Who made everything? And just like today, there are all ideas in that culture of the origin of human beings. Athenians, Greeks had their own theory that they all came from the soil. They were soil people. And because they came from the soil, somehow they were superior to everyone else. So Greeks thought that they were superior. Paul says, no, listen. The one God who made everything, contra all of your philosophies, this one God, he did it all. And he is this one God who made it all, the Lord of heaven and earth. And the word Lord here means owner or possessor or master. So in one sentence, he says, the God who made everything owns it all. And just to finish the sentence out well, he says, does not live in temples made with human hands. How utterly offensive when there is a temple literally on every corner. And even Paul, being a Jewish man, knew that God in some very special way, appeared in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem for a time. But Paul also knew, as we learned last week, that God cannot be confined to a particular space or location. God exists everywhere, all the time, and Paul knew this, and so he looks around, Paul does, he looks around Athenian culture and he says, hey, you know this unknown God, that you have this altar here too. Let me tell you about him. He is the one God who made it all, he owns it all, and he doesn't live in your temple. He is absolutely brilliant. In one sentence, he dismantles all of their thoughts. He dispels all of their philosophies and superstitions to tell the people of Athens in this council, the elite of the elite, what this one God is like. And if all of this weren't offensive enough, verse 25a, he says this, and he, this God, this one God, he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. You see, the Greeks believed that somehow human beings added something to the gods. They needed the gods needed human worship. And the word here for served, this one God, he's not served by human hands, is the word therapeuo. And that's where we get the word therapeutic from, and it means to care for, to comfort, or to aid someone in need. Now stop and think about this for a second. This one God who made everything, who really owns it all, doesn't need your therapy. He doesn't need anything from you. And somehow their gods thought that, or they thought that their gods needed something. No. Paul is saying, no, this God, he doesn't need anything, which would demonstrate how superior he was to their gods and how utterly offensive that could be, because they had shaped their whole life around this pantheon of gods. No. This God, He's one God, and he made it all, and he owns it all, and he doesn't need anything from you. And so Jesus, for instance, Jesus shows up on the scene, and he's coming into Jerusalem, and on the last week of his life, all of the people are singing his praises, and the Pharisees, they get a little bit nervous because Rome might hear them singing these messianic praises. You see, there was a Roman garrison located right there on the Temple Mount. So Rome was present to squash any uprising, and at the thought of a Messiah entering town, that could cause the people to go into a great disturbance, and maybe they would revolt against Rome. And so the religious leaders who are in some way connected to Rome, and they want to keep the peace when the people are all praising Jesus, they're worshiping Jesus as if he's insecure and he needs something. Says the religious leaders say, hey, tell the people to be quiet because we don't want Rome to hear. And what does Jesus say? Hey, if they're quiet, even these rocks will cry out. In other words, God is not in need of our therapy. He does not need our worship to exist. As a matter of fact, all of creation, past, present, and future, will indeed, if they have not already, worship him. He doesn't need our worship. And it's not surprising because of, say, for instance, we go back to the Old Testament, Psalm 50. God says this, I have no need of anything that you have. I own every animal. I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. And if I were hungry, I would not ask you. God using human sarcasm gives me such great hope. I don't need you or anything that you have. And so there's a sense in which we as human beings, we as the people of God, need to be reminded that we are not the star of the show. We get 2 seconds of screen time, and our sole job is to clap for the King and then exit the stage. He's not up there going, hey, I'm so glad you guys came out to church today. I know it was a struggle, but hey, thanks for coming. And that 50 cents you put in the offering, man, I know you could use that somewhere, but I really need it. So, man, Thank you. You are so good and you are so faithful. How ridiculous, how absurd that really is. But this is how we make God out to be. As if he is needy, like he needs us, like he is insecure in some way, like he really needs all of us. God is completely, in and of himself, self-sufficient. And we are made to worship him. We are extras. We are dudes in hats whose sole job is to clap for the king and exit the stage. And we so often forget this. And so Paul, knowing this, comes into town. A town full of idols. And we have our own idols. And he says this, the one God who made it all, who owns it all, he doesn't live in your temples, and you don't give him therapy. And then he goes on to say in verse 25b, rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. Notice the list. Notice the list. Life, breath, and everything else. So God is not needy. No, according to this, God gives everything. He doesn't need you to give him anything in return. He doesn't need it. Now that's his plan, but he doesn't need it. It's not going to make him any bigger or any less if you give it or don't give it. God is God and he's all by himself. And what does he do? Because he owns everything and because he is everything and he created everything, he is our all in all and he gives. He doesn't take, he gives. And every so often, and I don't know about you, but I'm sure that it's true. I don't want to make that accusation, but I'm sure that it's true. Just knowing human nature, and if you're like me, we play the God you owe me game. We know that God gives, and so sometimes we say things like, God, you know, I'm really a good person. I mean, I put a golf shirt on and dress pants on once a week just to honor you. You know, look at all the good things I do for you. I'm a pastor. And look at all the bad things I don't do for you. And God, you got to make this right. I think you owe me something. Now, we don't say this out loud, but we kind of live this way. Dramatic pause, which means you think about it for a second. We don't say it, but we kind of live this way. Kind of like, let's keep score when things go wrong. We want God to make it up to us because we think we're the star of the show and we deserve something from God. But God gives us life, breath, and everything else. And so God, being gracious as he is, he says, okay, let's play the point game then. You think that I owe you something. Let's play the point game. Now, the beating of your heart. Last I checked, I get credit for that. And when you're breathing while you're asleep, I get credit for that. All the good food that you love to eat Sunday after church, I get credit for that too. Oh, and by the way, you like holding your wife's hand or your husband's hand or your girlfriend's hand and the tingle that you get when you're 15 and you touch a girl's arm for the first time? Or did I just confess something? Yeah, that was me. I did that. I get credit for every mountaintop, every valley, every field, every ocean, every beach, every good and pleasant piece of beauty and truth you ever experience in your life. I get credit for it, and I'm like, okay, I got it. It's kind of like when I was a kid growing up and I would ask my dad for allowance for doing chores around the house. I kind of get the same lecture. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, Dad. Do you have a roof over your head? Yeah. You get to sit at a table and eat? Yeah. You have a bed to sleep in? Yeah, Dad. Okay. Whew, I got it. Now, one time he did pay me for mowing the grass. I begged him. I said, Dad, please pay me for mowing the grass. I got a friend to help me too. He said, okay, I'll pay you. So we mowed the grass. We thought we were going to get some cash, you know. He paid us in Reese cups. That was it. I'm like, what? I thought my dad owed me something, and that's how we live our life with God. We think that he owes us something simply because we are the stars of our own show. Now, in all of this, God isn't saying that we're not important. God is not saying that he doesn't care about us. As a matter of fact, the story begins with this truth, that we are image bearers of God. We bear the very image of God in our being, and that we are so valuable, Christ died for us. So strike that from your thought. God created us in His image, and we are indeed somebody, but it's only because He gave us that. That's a gift from God. So the problem comes not in what God has given us or how He's created us or that He sent His Son to die for us, because we are indeed so valuable and near to His heart. No, the problem is this, that in our hearts, or maybe I should say it this way, our hearts are idol-making factories. And the number one idol that we love to worship is us. Whether we want to admit it or not, it's true. Our hearts are idol-making factories, and the number one idol that we like to worship is us. And so how absurd would it be for a dude in a hat to walk around and say, hey, I am the star of this episode of Lord of the Rings. And then think how completely absurd. Multiply it by infinity. How absurd is it that people of God walk around in God's world claiming to be the star of the show when in reality we are only extras? How absurd. We treat God like we're the star and He's the supporting actor. And yes, I know this is obvious. The story is not about us, but that's not how we live. This is how we live. My agenda, my preferences, my desires, my likes, my whatever. And we're dragging Jesus along and we're saying, hey God, could you bless this? Hey, could you bless this? Hey, I want to do this. Could you bless this? Do you see what we're doing? We're saying we're the star and you're a supporting extra. Maybe you're even an extra. That's all. You see how we get, why? Because our hearts are idol-making factories, and the number one idol that we like to worship is we ourselves. We make ourselves out to be the star, and every so often the people of God need to be reminded that we're not the star of the movie. We get 2 seconds of screen time, and our sole job is to clap for the King and then exit the stage. And if we can learn to do that, we will learn what real life, God's life, is all about. And we will begin to learn and understand what real worship, what true worship is. When we let God be the star and we realize our role, we're just extras. We're just dudes in hats. Revelation chapter 4. Turn there if you would. And if you don't know anything about the Bible, my goodness, this is not going to help you at all. Revelation chapter 4. I'm then going to spend a little bit of time reading a text here. Anytime we approach the book of Revelation, one of the reasons that we don't understand it is because it is a very Jewish book. The author, John, I call him Super Jew. All theologians say he was a great writer in Greek. And I say, no, he is a super Jew. John is super Jew to me. Maybe that's in my own little world where I'm the star. And I think I know it all. But the book itself is very Jewish in nature, and so that sometimes is foreign to us. And throughout, for instance, throughout the Old Testament, there are throne room scenes. Isaiah has a throne room scene. Ezekiel has a throne room scene. Daniel has an impressive throne room scene. But because we're Old Testament illiterate, we don't recognize all of the imagery that is being pulled forward from the Old Testament that John is drawing from to paint the picture about Jesus. And so we read the book of Revelation, and this is what we do. We say, aha, Saddam Hussein, right there, the Antichrist. And we forget, we don't realize that there's a whole lot more going on than that here. You see, the title of the book is The Revelation. That is the unveiling of Jesus Christ, not the unveiling of the Antichrist. This book is about how great Jesus is and how we are supposed to worship Him, what real worship looks like. That's what the book is about. So quit reading into it your own little pettiness, making yourself the star of the show, saying, I understand this. It's hard to understand. Resolve that you are an extra, and when you read the book, then you can see Jesus for who He truly is. And then you will receive a blessing that is tied to the reading of the book, that's in the book itself. If you read, hear, listen, you will be blessed by this book. Why? Because it shows us what Jesus is really like and how we are to respond in worship to Him. And the fact that when we think of worship, we think of music and singing shows you just how much we don't know about worship, because it is so much more than that. Worship is not just a religious activity that we do at church. It's a human activity. As a matter of fact, it's an activity that all of creation participates in. And that's what Revelation depicts. Revelation chapter 4, verse 1. After this, that's John, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had heard first speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven, with someone sitting on it. There's a throne in heaven, and someone is sitting on it. This is just a very Jewish way of saying that God is sitting on the throne. But so that you could protect the divine name, the great name of God, the Jews found ways to reference Him without actually saying His name. It was the name that should never be uttered because it was too sacred. And so for John to say someone is sitting on the throne, he is saying that God Himself is sitting on the throne. But I revere His name so much that I resist saying it, so that I avoid in every single way profaning the very name of the Maker of heaven and earth and my Redeemer. Sometimes they just call Him Hashem. In Hebrew that means the name. He's just the name, blessed be He. You see, and all of that represents. And so here is this someone, God Himself, sitting on the throne, and John sees this. Verse 3. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumbles, and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. And these are the 7 spirits of God. And in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. You see, rich imagery that we know absolutely nothing about. In the center, around the throne, of all of this, so you get this idea of this all-encircling, all-encompassing setting. In the center, around the throne, were 4 living creatures. And they were covered with eyes in front and in back. And the first living creature was like a lion, and the second was like an ox, and the third had the face of a man, and the fourth was like a flying eagle. And each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. Day and night, they never stopped saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Isaiah 6:3. Isaiah saw the same scene. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to Him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before Him who sits on the throne, and they worship Him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne, and they say, "You are worthy, O Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by you, and by your will, they were created and have their being." And then one of my favorite passages in all of the book of Revelation. So here you have this wonderful worship service going on with the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders. And everybody is just focused on the throne, and they're worshiping someone, God, who sits on the throne. Then all of a sudden something else catches John's attention. Then I saw in the right hand of Him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. And now we meet the one who is worthy." Then I saw a lamb, Jesus. I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by 4 living creatures and the elders. And the Lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God that is sent out to all of the earth. Of course, right? You got it. You're following me. See, look at all the imagery. That's so wonderful. And He went and He took the scroll from the right hand of Him who sat on the throne. And when He had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders, now they fall down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. And they sang a new song. Up until now, they've been worshiping God on the throne, but now their worship shifts to the Lamb, to Jesus. And they say this, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom of priests to serve our God, and they will reign on earth." Then I looked and heard a voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. That's the largest Greek number. That's the only way that they could say it. This is like infinity, an infinite amount. And they encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. They're all around the throne, and they're focusing on that throne. They're focusing on the Lamb. And in a loud voice they were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." And then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them. Does that leave any creature out? No, it does not. Every creature. And this is what they were saying: "To Him who sits on the throne and unto the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and forever." And the 4 living creatures said, "Amen." And the elders fell down and they worshiped. One of the interesting things is when we get a glimpse of heaven, you know what we get a glimpse of? A worship service. And think about the implications. You see, we don't start a worship service around here at 10:30. We don't start a worship service on Sunday evening at 6 o'clock. We join a worship service that is already in progress as everybody all together focused on the throne, Jesus Christ and God. We join with them. Think of the wonderful implication of all of that. We're just hooking into it when we come together. And we pray and we worship and we gather around the Word and we pray and we take communion. We are simply joining a worship service that already is in progress. It never ends. It has always been, as long as there has been a creature other than God. Because God, by His very nature, is worthy of worship forever and ever and ever. And so we simply join into that worship service. And in that moment, what we realize, and this is really good news, and it's so obvious. Here it is. There is a throne at the center of the universe, and we're not on it. There's a throne in the center of the universe, and we are not on it. Hallelujah. Can I get a witness? Because when I put myself on the throne, I usually goof things up for me and everyone involved. There is a throne at the center of all of reality, and none of us, save one, is worthy to be on that throne. Right. Think of the image that we get, and think, if you would, of that throne room that I just read about and was just described by John as it's revealed to him in the Revelation. It's the picture of the throne room, and in the center there is a throne, and then in concentric circles around the throne are the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders and a myriad of angels, and then every living creature on the earth, under the earth, around the earth. Every bit of all of creation is worshiping God. Everything is focused in one direction. They are worshiping, praising, declaring what God is like. And it's all about Him, and it is so not about you. It is so not about me. So can you imagine the absurdity? Whenever it is that we get to join this assembly that's already in progress, we elbow the person next to us. Hey, do you know that by the age of 30, I was already poised to be the next owner of the business that I worked for? That's right. Yeah. Hey, do you know what I did last night? Yeah. Everyone else is singing and praising, right? And you're like, hey, me, I. Hey, look. Detracting from the one who was at the center. How absurd is that? That I want to steal the spotlight from the star of the show in the moment that we join that heavenly assembly in worship to the only one who is worthy. And what we're saying is, I'm the star and God is the extra in this whole thing. So when we worship, we focus towards the throne on God alone, and we give our hearts in that moment and our attention and everything about us to Him. How ridiculous for me to think that I'm the star. And I want to go around telling everybody that I am a star when I'm only an extra. How ridiculous, because the image that we get of worship is that God is on the throne and everyone is focused on Him because He is indeed the star. And let me just dispel another myth, okay? Loved ones that have gone on before us. We talk about it, they're watching over us. I happen to think, this is my personal view, and I think it's pretty accurate, there is something much more captivating in heaven than what I'm having for dinner. There is someone that is so much more worthy of their attention. Every eye is not on me. Every eye is not on you. And once we see God in worship, we realize that He's the one that it's really all about. And it's not about us. We are not the stars. And so as we begin a conversation of worship, it all has to start here. It's all about God who's the star. We just happen to be extras. We're all looking in His direction. We're all clapping. And at the end of the day, we exit the stage. And so it is so much a shame. Now let me draw from our previous series, Revolution. How petty, how silly, how star hungry are we that we would evaluate a worship time in song or a worship gathering where we have church together and we rate it like we would a movie, whether I liked it or not. Because when we do that, we make it about us. You see, I'm not saying that we don't have preferences. Good. But this is what happens. Preferences become props. And so we can't really worship unless the music is this way or that way. We can't really worship unless the lighting is this way or that way. They sing this song, or this person leads, or that person leads. And we've turned worship around now. We've become the star of worship. It has to be all about us. And we say that we're worshiping God, and we draw all of the attention in the meantime to ourselves. How petty. How blasphemous of a people are we if we seek to do that? You stop and think about what worship is. That's why everything has to start with God when we talk about worship, and not us. It is so much about Him and so not about you and I. The problem is, though, we live like it is. Now, we just saw the picture of the throne. Now let's draw another picture real quick in our minds, okay? Now, since Pam and I are going on vacation in a couple weeks, did I mention that already? Yeah, I think I did. Picture a beach chair. And I'm on the beach chair. And around the beach chair is my wife. She's that first concentric circle. And outside of that, family. And outside of that, friends. And I wouldn't say it, but I kind of live this way. I want all the focus to be in on me. There I am on my little beach chair. There's my wife, and my family, my friends, and I want them all to be focusing on me. Why? Because I'm the star of my own little show. The problem is, on each one of those circles, there are other little beach chairs. And they're all saying, look at me, it's about me, it's about me. And then the beach chairs, they start marrying. And then you have to start working out, it's about me, no, it's about me, no, it's about me, no, it's about me. And then we get together and we have little me monsters. And it seems like we never shake living like that, because our hearts are idol-making factories. And the number one idol that we worship is ourselves. We would never say it, but that's how we live. And that's kind of a playful way, just getting that image in your mind. But this is the root of either idolatry or true worship. Putting me at the center, making myself the star. And this becomes the question then. You've got 2 seconds of screen time. How will you spend it? Who will you clap for? Who will you glorify? Whose name will you make great or seek to make great? You see, Jesus doesn't care about style. All He cares about are people who will honor Him with their lips and with their heart. That's what He cares about. And so we're reminded that there is a throne and we are not on it. And at the end of the day, no one will remember the guy in the hat. They will only remember who the dude in the hat was cheering for. 50 years from now, nobody will remember us, but I hope that they remember who we were cheering for. You see, life is short. James reminds us of that in James chapter 4. He says, life is like a mist. It's here in the morning and by the afternoon, it's gone. Other places in the Bible, life is like a fleeting shadow. Or it's like grass that withers quickly. And the older we get, the more we realize that we really only have 2 seconds of screen time. That's it. And then we exit the stage. And a life that is lived in those 2 seconds for God and not for self. One that is lived out in true worship, focusing on Him, making Him the star, consists of our 2 seconds of screen time where we clap for the King and we exit the stage. And we know this. But time and time again, we need to be reminded. We only have those 2 seconds of screen time. And that becomes the problem. Because in those 2 seconds of screen time, imagine back to the video. Imagine if you were watching that video with the guy in the hat, with the dude in the hat. And you came up to that scene. And what would he be doing? That's me, it's me, it's me, it's me. You see, that's the problem. Because we only have 2 seconds of screen time, we want to suck up everybody's attention and make everybody think that we are the star. And I can say this, I can say we, because I know that it is common to human experience. I have studied anthropology. Not that that means anything. But I know what human beings are made of, created in the image of God, and they have a desire as such for attention. But it's always misguided attention. And so if we have 2 seconds of screen time, when we realize that, we want all of that attention. I think back to another great Greek epic, since I spoke about Greek at the beginning of the sermon. And this is the question in the hearts and minds of Greek men. We want a great name. We want a starring role. We want a memorable performance. As a matter of fact, this is Homer's observation. The question in the Greek epic, Iliad. Anybody ever read the Iliad? Nobody. Oh my goodness. My daughter and her future husband. Yeah, that's right. Her fiance. Yeah, they've read the Iliad. The need to be remembered is common to all men. And the question is this that Homer might pose. When I'm gone from the stage, will I be remembered? Men like Achilles, men like Hector, they are actors who are stars in the play of life, in the production of life, and yet their stardom is tied to their very demise. Will my name be great? But it's really not about them as much as we may think. It's not about Achilles or Hector or any of the other main players. It's about the war. It's about the tragedy. It's about the Iliad. It's about the sacking of Troy. Iliad means those things. It's about the internal conflict that goes on within the hearts of men. Will I have a great name when I exit the stage? But worship is so much not about that. Jesus reminds us, as I close, if you want to save your life, you got to lose it. To live, you got to be willing to die to yourself. To be great, you have to be a servant. This is true worship. And when the people of God realize this and become convinced that it's all about Him and not us, and when we learn the lesson of John the Baptist, I must decrease and He must increase. The minute we get that is the minute that we become true worshipers. When we turn the stage and we turn the camera and we realize that we are the extra and there's a star and He's the only one who is worth our worship. Now listen, we are loved, we are incredibly valued, and we are unique in God's eyes. But we're only extras. We're all just dudes, excuse me ladies, we're all just dudes. And I love my wife in a hat. We are all just dudes in hats. And our sole job is to clap for the star and exit the stage. Imagine what we would be like as the people of God. Imagine what our church would be like if we were a church full of extras whose sole job was to clap for the King and then exit the stage. We are out of the picture. To live for Him means to die to self, and that is true worship, to put God first. And for me, with my idol-making heart, to recognize that I am only an extra. So you and I, we're extras. I think I said it enough, and I think we get the point. I know I have. It's up to us to live it. We're extras. Let's use our 2 seconds of screen time to clap for the King.